the galaxy had been dominated by predatory species for millennia. For countless civilizations, the rule of the cosmos was a brutal affair. The strong devoured the weak, and sentient beings were often seen as little more than cattle for hunting. But, in this vast universe, there was a species that had been underestimated for far too long. Humans had once been an insignificant species, tucked away on a small blue planet on the edge of a relatively unimportant star system. Their early history was filled with war, division, and hardship, yet they had persevered. Over time, they began to expand, first reaching for the stars, then spreading their influence across the galaxy. But their arrival in the galactic stage was met with skepticism. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, and their physical abilities were far from remarkable when compared to the super predators that ruled the galaxy. Yet humans were different in ways that no one had expected. Despite their perceived fragility, they were relentless. They adapted to the challenges of the cosmos with unparalleled tenacity, and what they lacked in strength or speed, they made up for in intelligence, ingenuity, and the ability to form alliances. But most importantly, humans had something that no other species had: a burning will to survive, and a refusal to bow down to those who would seek to dominate them. It was only when the galaxy's most feared predator, the Vracs, turned their attention to humanity that the true test would begin. The Vracs were a species of towering, muscle-bound giants known for their brutal hunting prowess. Their society was built upon the concept of dominance, and they had long considered themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. The Vracs had never encountered a species that could offer them any real challenge. When the Vracs first arrived at Earth, they were met with a strange new environment. The humans, despite their initial surprise, did not immediately cower in fear. They fought back, but not in the way the Vracs were accustomed to. The humans did not have the strength to match the Vracs, nor the weapons to combat their sheer power. But what they did have was something the Vracs had never encountered before: creativity and adaptability. The humans quickly realized that brute force would not win this war. Instead, they used their intelligence and resourcefulness to devise weapons that were uniquely suited to counter the Vracs' strengths. In a matter of months, they turned their planet into a fortified bastion, filled with traps, automated defenses, and guerrilla tactics designed to exploit the Vracs' overconfidence. It was a battle of wits, and the Vracs quickly learned that humanity was not as weak as they had once assumed. The Vracs underestimated the power of human unity. While they had been used to conquering civilizations through fear, humanity had something else entirely. They had each other. The humans fought side by side, setting aside their differences in the face of a common enemy. Their unity and determination turned the tide of battle in ways the Vracs could never have anticipated. The first victory came when a small group of human soldiers, working together, managed to capture a Vracs warship. It was a daring move that defied all odds, and it sent shockwaves through the Vracs' leadership. The humans had proven that they could strike at the heart of their empire, and that they were not to be underestimated. The Vracs, realizing that they could not conquer humanity with sheer force, resorted to a different tactic. They began hunting the humans in secret, sending out smaller teams to pick off individuals and weaken their resolve. But humanity's ability to adapt proved more formidable than the Vracs could ever have imagined. Instead of cowering, the humans set traps, laid decoys, and fought back with relentless precision. They turned the hunt on its head, and soon the Vracs found themselves on the defensive, something no one had ever expected. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the Vracs were forced to retreat. For the first time in centuries, the apex predators were being hunted. And it was humanity that had turned the tables. The news of the Vracs' retreat spread quickly across the galaxy, sending shockwaves through every corner of the cosmos. For millennia, the Vracs had been the untouchable force, the epitome of predatory strength, feared by every species they encountered. Yet, here they were, forced to pull back from a species they had once considered easy prey. The universe watched in awe as humanity, once thought weak and insignificant, had proven itself capable of defeating one of the most terrifying hunters in existence. But while the Vracs were retreating, they were not defeated. The war was far from over. Behind the scenes, Vracs leaders began to plan their next move, their egos bruised but not broken. They knew that if they were to reclaim their position as the apex predators, they would have to adapt. The arrogance that had initially led to their downfall was slowly being replaced with something much more dangerous, a cold, calculated drive for revenge. Meanwhile, humanity had tasted victory, and the realization of what they had accomplished began to settle in. They had repelled the Vracs from Earth, but they knew the fight was far from over. If the Vracs came back, it wouldn't just be Earth they'd be after. It would be every human settlement in the galaxy. The humans needed to prepare for what was coming next. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. Humanity's leaders, scientists, and military strategists began to collaborate on an unprecedented scale. They built advanced weaponry, trained new soldiers, and strengthened alliances with other species that had once been subjugated by the Vracs. This new united front was born from necessity, but it quickly became something more. It became a symbol of hope for all the oppressed species across the galaxy. Humanity had not just fought for their survival, they had fought for the survival of everyone who had ever been preyed upon by the Vracs. The alliances between human and non-human forces grew stronger. The Zorax, a species of telepathic beings, provided invaluable intelligence, sharing information about Vracs' movements and strategies. The Trell, an insectoid species skilled in rapid, efficient combat, trained human soldiers in new tactics that made them even deadlier. The Daro, a race of technologically advanced pacifists, offered humanitarian support, providing medical aid and helping to heal the wounds of war. Despite the rapid progress, there were those who feared that humanity was becoming too arrogant, too certain of its newfound strength. The Vracs were no longer a direct threat, but the galaxy was filled with other predators, some known, many unknown, that would seek to take advantage of humanity's rising prominence. And if the Vracs returned with reinforcements, would humanity truly be ready? In the midst of this uncertainty, a breakthrough occurred. A team of human scientists working alongside their alien allies discovered a way to counter the Vracs' biological advantage. The Vracs relied heavily on their brute strength, their enhanced physical abilities, and their ability to track their prey across vast distances. But they had one major flaw: their reliance on a specific genetic trait that allowed them to hunt with such precision. Humanity had unlocked a way to disrupt this genetic trait, effectively neutralizing the Vracs' ability to track them. The discovery sent shockwaves through the human military. This new weapon, a biological disruptor, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't just a weapon that could kill, it was one that could render entire species helpless. The Vracs were no longer the top predators, and humanity was about to take the fight to them. The first test of the disruptor came sooner than expected. A Vracs warship had been spotted near one of humanity's outer colonies. The humans acted quickly, launching a counteroffensive before the Vracs could establish a foothold. Using the biological disruptor in tandem with their advanced weaponry, they struck hard and fast, catching the Vracs off guard. The Vracs, unprepared for such a rapid and precise attack, were thrown into disarray. It was a decisive victory, and it proved that humanity had not only caught up to the Vracs, they had surpassed them. But the victory came at a cost. The war was far from over, and the galaxy was now fully aware that humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. The Vracs, humiliated by their defeat, would not rest until they had regained their status as the galaxy's supreme predators. The rest of the galaxy would have to decide: would they stand with humanity, or would they once again bow to the Vracs? The fate of the galaxy was about to be determined by the next great confrontation. In the wake of humanity's victory over the Vracs, the galaxy had become a powder keg, each species carefully watching and waiting for the next move. The Vracs were not a species accustomed to defeat, and their pride was not something easily shattered. Their leadership had been humiliated, their dominance questioned, and they were seething with a desire to reclaim their place at the top of the food chain. The Vracs warlords, once powerful and unchallenged, began to splinter. Some believed the only way to regain their lost honor was through an all-out war, one that would burn the humans and their allies to the ground. Others, more pragmatic, realized that a direct confrontation with humanity would be suicidal. In the shadows, secret meetings and quiet alliances began to form, as the Vracs planned their next move, this time, with far more caution. At the same time, humanity was reeling from the aftermath of their victory. While their morale was high, the burden of leadership weighed heavily on them. They had taken down one of the galaxy's greatest predators, but they knew that their victory had drawn the attention of other predators lurking in the shadows. The galaxy had watched their rise with fascination, but now, many were eager to see if humanity could hold on to their newfound power, or if it would slip through their fingers. The decision was made: humanity would not sit idly by and wait for the next attack. They would go on the offensive. But this time, they would not fight for survival alone, they would fight for the survival of every oppressed species in the galaxy. The human dominion, as it had now come to be called, formed alliances with species that had long been oppressed by the Vrax and other predators. The Trell, the Zorax, the Daro, and several other civilizations came together, united by the common goal of ensuring that no species would ever again be hunted for sport. Humanity's military strength was rapidly expanding, and the new coalition, though diverse, was strong. Together, they began preparing for the inevitable war that would decide the fate of the galaxy. But they knew they couldn't win by fighting the Vrax alone. The key to their victory would lie in crippling the Vrax's ability to dominate. And that meant targeting the heart of their empire, their homeworld. The humans, ever resourceful, had developed a plan. They would strike at the core of the Vrax's power, the place where their might had been forged. A bold move, to be sure, but one that could cripple the Vrax and send a message to the rest of the galaxy: humanity was not to be underestimated. To accomplish this, humanity needed to infiltrate the Vrax homeworld, a feat that was no small task. The planet was heavily fortified, its atmosphere hostile, and its defenses unparalleled. But humanity's ingenuity had no equal. Using a combination of stealth technology, adaptive warfare strategies, and the support of their allies, they launched a daring raid against the Vrax capital city. The operation was a risky gamble, one that had never been attempted by any species before. The humans, with their allies, infiltrated the heart of Vrax society. It was a massive, sprawling metropolis built on towering spires and surrounded by heavily guarded military installations. But inside the city's walls, there was something no one had expected: the Vrax's greatest secret. The Vrax, in their arrogance, had built an underground facility where they had been experimenting with genetic modification, creating an even more dangerous breed of Vrax, capable of superior strength, speed, and intelligence. It was this creation that had made them such an overwhelming force in the galaxy. But the humans had stumbled upon this dark secret, and they knew that if they destroyed it, the Vrax would never be able to recover. The assault was swift and deadly. With the Vrax forces distracted by the humans' deceptive tactics, the infiltrators reached the genetic facility. A small, elite team of soldiers, led by a daring human commander, planted the charges that would destroy the facility and, with it, the Vrax's ability to produce their enhanced warriors. The operation was a success, but the price was steep. The team was ambushed by Vrax soldiers just as they set the final charges. In a desperate last stand, the humans fought valiantly, ensuring the mission's success at the cost of their lives. The explosion that followed was nothing short of catastrophic. The Vrax's genetic facility was obliterated, and with it, their hopes of rebuilding their empire. The Vrax had lost their edge. Without their enhanced warriors, they were just another species, vulnerable and defeated. The victory was a pivotal moment in the war, one that would go down in history as a turning point. But even as the humans celebrated their success, they knew the battle was far from over. The Vrax were wounded but not defeated. And they would be back. The question now was, how would the galaxy respond? Would the rest of the universe rally behind humanity, or would other predators seek to capitalize on the chaos? As the fires of war continued to burn across the galaxy, one thing was certain: humanity had proven itself capable of standing tall in a galaxy full of monsters, and they were not about to stop. The explosion on the Vrax homeworld sent ripples through the galaxy. The destruction of the Vrax's genetic facility had crippled their military might, but it also left them vulnerable in a way that no one had anticipated. The Vrax were no longer the unstoppable predators they had once been. Yet, in their desperation, they proved to be more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. As the Vrax leadership scrambled to regroup and recover from their losses, their pride and anger drove them into a corner. The Vrax warlords, who had once argued over tactics, now stood united in their singular purpose: revenge. They began rallying their remaining forces, preparing to strike back at the human dominion with everything they had left. But something had changed in the galaxy. The destruction of the Vrax's most powerful weapon had sparked a sense of rebellion among the oppressed species that had long lived under their shadow. The galaxy's most vulnerable civilizations, who had once been scattered and divided, now saw a glimmer of hope. Humanity's victory over the Vrax had proven that it was possible to stand against the predators, to rise up and fight back. The Vrax were not invincible. As the Vrax scrambled to rebuild their forces, more and more species joined the human dominion, adding their strength to the growing resistance. The galaxy, once divided, was slowly but surely coming together. Humanity had become the beacon of hope for those who had long lived in fear, and now their allies were ready to follow them into the heart of the Vrax Empire. The next phase of the war was about to begin, and humanity knew it would be their most challenging battle yet. The Vrax were wounded, but they were not broken. And they had something the humans didn't: sheer, unrelenting numbers. The Vrax had sentient warriors spread across countless systems, and their forces were still formidable, even without the genetic enhancements. The galaxy now found itself at a crossroads. Would humanity and its allies be able to finish what they had started, or would the Vrax rise again and reclaim their place as the dominant species in the galaxy? With the clock ticking and the Vrax forces preparing for a final offensive, the human leaders made their move. They knew that this war would not be won on the battlefield alone. They needed to strike at the heart of the Vrax's power once again. But this time, the operation would be far riskier. Humanity's goal was not just to defeat the Vrax, it was to completely dismantle their empire. The plan was simple: a two-pronged attack that would hit the Vrax from multiple directions. While one fleet would strike at the Vrax's military bases, distracting them and keeping them occupied, a smaller, stealthier team would infiltrate the Vrax's government centers. The goal was to destabilize their leadership, to sow distrust and disarray within their ranks, and to make it clear that the Vrax's reign was over. The humans knew that the Vrax's reliance on brute force meant they had little ability to function without strong leadership. If they could cripple the Vrax leadership, the rest of their forces would be little more than a rabid dog without a master. The operation began with a stunning show of force. Humanity's fleet, backed by their new alien allies, engaged the Vrax's outer defenses in a series of calculated strikes. But the real danger lay behind enemy lines. A small, elite force of human soldiers, alongside a handful of Trell and Zorax operatives, managed to infiltrate the Vrax capital and make their way to the heart of the government complex. It was a high-risk operation, and everyone involved knew that they were unlikely to make it out alive. But humanity's resolve was unyielding. These soldiers were not fighting for glory or conquest, they were fighting for the survival of everything they had built, and for the future of every species in the galaxy that had ever been hunted by the Vrax. As the human strike team infiltrated the Vrax government facility, they encountered a surprising twist: the Vrax were already on the verge of collapse. The loss of their genetic warriors and the constant defeats had created deep rifts within their leadership. Some warlords were already planning to surrender, while others were preparing to destroy what was left of their empire rather than allow it to fall into the hands of their rivals. The human team quickly seized on this opportunity, working with disillusioned Vrax officials who were ready to defect. In a daring move, they broadcast a message to the galaxy, exposing the infighting within the Vrax leadership and revealing the truth about their empire's impending collapse. It was a message of hope for every oppressed species, and it sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Vrax, once united in their bloodlust, were now fractured, their power slipping through their fingers. The galaxy had seen the predator turn on itself, and it was clear to everyone that the Vrax's reign of terror was coming to an end. But even as the Vrax faltered, their final act of desperation was about to unfold. Realizing that they were on the brink of extinction, the Vrax unleashed a final assault, a massive strike against humanity's core worlds, a desperate last-ditch effort to drag the galaxy back into the darkness. It was the final battle, and the outcome would determine the future of the galaxy. The Vrax's final strike came with the fury of a dying star. Desperation had driven them to the unthinkable. With their empire crumbling and their leadership in disarray, the warlords decided to rally what remained of their forces for one last assault, a full-scale attack on humanity's core worlds, hoping to destroy the heart of the human dominion before they could secure their victory. It was a brutal, calculated move, one that they hoped would restore their pride and salvage whatever power they had left. The humans were prepared for the worst. Their intelligence had tracked Vrak's movements, and their military was on high alert. But even with their preparations, they knew that a full Vrak's offensive would be unlike anything they had ever faced before. The Vraks had drawn on every last resource, throwing everything they had into this assault. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy, and neither side could afford to lose. As the Vrak's warships descended upon humanity's capital worlds, the galaxy held its breath. The Vraks were relentless, their ships massive and terrifying, their warriors savage and bloodthirsty. But humanity had something that the Vraks had long underestimated: unity. The human dominion was no longer just a collection of planets, it was a cohesive force, a unified front, with every species working together toward a common goal. The Trell, Zorax, Daro, and many others joined humanity in the defense of their worlds, adding their strength to the fight. The battle raged for days, as humanity's combined fleets clashed with the Vraks in a series of fierce, high-stakes skirmishes across space. Every ship that fell was a devastating blow, but humanity fought with everything they had. They had fought for survival once before, and they would not allow the Vraks to take that away from them. The battlefield was a chaotic storm of laser fire, explosions, and twisted metal as the Vraks tried to force their way through humanity's defenses. But humanity had learned from the past, and they had learned to adapt. It wasn't just brute strength that would win this battle, it was strategy, ingenuity, and the ability to think several steps ahead. The human fleet, with their alien allies, used the Vraks' own tactics against them. They lured them into traps, baiting them into engagements where they could use their superior technology and guerrilla tactics to exploit the Vraks' weaknesses. What had once been a predator's advantage, strength in numbers and overwhelming force, was now a liability. The Vraks, in their desperation, had become predictable. But as the battle reached its climax, the humans faced a horrifying revelation. The Vraks warlords had one final trick up their sleeve, a weapon of mass destruction. Hidden deep within their fleet was a doomsday device, an ancient, forbidden weapon capable of annihilating entire planets. It was a weapon that had been built during the height of the Vraks Empire, and now, in their final moments, they had resolved to use it to make sure humanity would never again threaten their dominance. The countdown had begun, and the weapon was aimed at Earth, humanity's home. If the Vraks could destroy Earth, they believed they could erase humanity's very existence and deal a final blow to the human dominion. It was a final act of vengeance, a desperate attempt to undo everything humanity had achieved. As the countdown continued, humanity's leaders scrambled to find a way to stop the weapon. The Vraks had underestimated their enemies once again. A small team of human engineers, accompanied by Trell saboteurs, managed to infiltrate the Vraks flagship, where the doomsday device was being activated. It was a suicide mission, one that would almost certainly result in their deaths, but there was no other choice. The team fought their way through the Vraks flagship, evading patrols and disabling security systems as they moved closer to the weapon. The ship was a maze of steel and fire, filled with Vraks soldiers determined to stop them at any cost. But the humans pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of their entire species rested on their success. Finally, they reached the control room. The device was massive, a terrifying structure of dark metal and pulsing energy. The countdown was almost at zero. Time was running out. The humans fought off the last of the Vraks guards and, with only seconds to spare, managed to disable the weapon's core. The countdown stopped, and the threat of total annihilation was averted. It was a victory, but it came at an immense cost. The sabotage team was wiped out in the process, their bravery saving countless lives but costing them their own. The war was not over, but humanity had once again proven that they would stop at nothing to defend their future. As the Vraks flagship began to break apart in a fiery explosion, the remaining Vraks forces retreated. The humans, battered but resolute, had turned the tide once again. But even as the dust settled and the stars began to return to their quiet rhythm, humanity knew that this was not the end. The Vraks were not gone for good. They would rebuild, they would regroup, and they would strike again. But humanity had shown them that they would no longer be prey. The galaxy had witnessed a turning point. The predators were no longer the ones calling the shots. The humans had proven that even the most powerful creatures in the galaxy could be toppled, not through brute force alone, but through unity, strategy, and an unbreakable will to survive. The war had not yet been won, but humanity's message was clear: the galaxy would no longer be a place where the strong fed on the weak. It would be a place where no one was prey. And that was only the beginning. The retreat of the Vraks, though significant, was far from a final victory. The remnants of their fleet limped back to what was left of their empire, their pride shattered, their leadership fractured beyond repair. But even in their weakness, they were still a formidable force, and their desire for vengeance burned like a dying star. The Vraks were not content to simply lick their wounds; they would come back, and they would try to reclaim what they had lost. However, something had changed. Humanity, once considered weak and insignificant, had grown into a force to be reckoned with. They had proven that even the most terrifying predators could be defeated, not through sheer strength alone, but through resourcefulness, unity, and an unwavering will to protect what mattered most. Humanity had not just survived, they had thrived, and they had become the cornerstone of a new galactic order. As the Vraks receded into the shadows, the rest of the galaxy watched with keen interest. The species that had once been the prey of the Vraks now saw humanity as a beacon of hope. The Trell, Zorax, Daro, and many others who had once been oppressed by the Vraks now stood alongside humanity, forging a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. The human dominion had grown stronger, not just through military might, but through alliances with other species who had long been kept under the Vraks' heel. This new coalition was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, a united front built on shared values and a common purpose. Humanity's leaders knew that the galaxy was still a dangerous place. The Vraks were not the only predators lurking in the darkness. But humanity had changed the rules of the game. They had shown that even the mightiest empire could fall, and that even the most fearsome species could be brought to its knees. And now, as they looked toward the future, they understood that they had a responsibility to protect not just Earth, but the entire galaxy from those who would seek to dominate and destroy. The next challenge would not be one of war, but of governance. The galaxy had changed, and it needed a new system of order, one that could prevent the rise of another empire like the Vraks. The human dominion, alongside their allies, began to lay the groundwork for a new galactic council. It would be a council of equals, where all species, no matter their size, strength, or history, would have a voice. It was a bold idea, one that required compromise and understanding, but it was the only way forward. The age of the predators was over, and the age of cooperation had begun. But not everyone was willing to accept this new order. In the shadows, a few factions, disillusioned Vraks loyalists, remnants of the old order, began to plot. They were not ready to accept defeat, and they would stop at nothing to reassert their dominance. While the galaxy celebrated the end of one predator's reign, others were waiting to fill the void. Humanity, ever vigilant, knew that the peace they had fought for was fragile. The galaxy was still full of dangers, and the old powers would never simply vanish. But they also knew that they had something the predators could never take away: the power of unity, the strength of their allies, and the knowledge that they had already overcome the impossible. The first steps of the new galactic order had been taken, but the true challenge lay ahead. In the coming years, humanity would face tests both internal and external. The Vraks would not be the last threat to their existence, and the Galactic Council would have to contend with the greed, fear, and ambition of those who sought to undermine it. But humanity had proven that it could rise to any challenge, and that the galaxy would never again be a place where the strong preyed upon the weak. The war was over, but the journey had only just begun. And as humanity and its allies looked toward the stars, they knew that they would always be ready to face whatever came next, together. For the galaxy was a vast, untamed place, but it was no longer a place where the predators could reign supreme. It was a place where humanity had carved out its place, and no one, nothing, could ever take that away. The galaxy was in a state of uneasy peace, but it was a peace forged in fire. Humanity's victory over the Vracs had sparked a new era, one where species once hunted and oppressed could stand side by side as equals. The human dominion, along with their new allies, began to rebuild the galaxy, but the scars of war were still fresh. There was no going back to the old way of life, and there was no certainty in the future. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and the fragile alliances humanity had forged were now being tested in ways they had not anticipated. In the wake of their hard-won victory, humanity became a symbol of hope to countless species. The new Galactic Council that had been established was a beacon of cooperation, but it was also a delicate balancing act. Each species, with its own history, culture, and ambitions, had to find a way to coexist. Some species were more hesitant to embrace this new order than others, and old grudges still simmered beneath the surface. The Council's first years were fraught with tension as debates over trade, territory, and defense raged on. Yet through it all, humanity stood as the stabilizing force, the glue holding the galaxy together. They had proven that they could face down the most terrifying predators in existence, and now they were proving that they could guide the galaxy through a new era of peace, one not built on fear or dominance, but on collaboration and mutual respect. However, the ghosts of the past would not be easily dismissed. Despite the fall of the Vracs, remnants of their empire still existed, hiding in the deepest corners of the galaxy. Rogue Vracs factions, embittered by their defeat, remained active, lurking on the fringes, waiting for their moment to strike. Humanity knew that their peace was fragile, and that they would always have to be vigilant. The predators, though weakened, had not disappeared entirely. They had simply retreated into the shadows, watching and waiting. As the years passed, the war with the Vracs became a memory for some, but for others, it was a reminder of the violence that could emerge if peace was not carefully guarded. Humanity had not only fought to survive, they had fought to create a future for themselves and every species that had suffered under the rule of tyrants. But that future was still uncertain. Then came the day that the galaxy would be tested once again. A new threat emerged from the depths of space. It was not another predatory species, but something far more insidious, a collection of rogue factions, led by those who sought to topple the fragile peace that had been established. This coalition, known as the Resurgence, was composed of former Vracs loyalists, warlords, and other rogue species that had been scattered after the fall of the Vracs Empire. They had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and now, they were ready to challenge the very foundation of the new galactic order. The Resurgence believed that the galaxy needed a new ruler, one who could restore the old ways of dominance and control. They had no interest in cooperation or peace. Their message was simple: the strong would rise again, and the weak would be crushed beneath their feet. They were a force built on rage, pride, and the desire for revenge. And they would not stop until they had overturned everything humanity and its allies had worked to build. The galaxy was once again plunged into chaos, as the Resurgence began launching coordinated attacks on key council systems. Trade routes were disrupted, planets were bombarded, and the very foundations of the galactic peace were shaken. Humanity, along with their allies, had to fight once more to protect everything they had gained. But this time, the fight would be different. The Resurgence was no longer a single empire to be defeated, it was a scattered, but powerful coalition, made up of former enemies and new foes alike. The Galactic Council was put to the test. The fragile alliances that had been formed were strained to the breaking point. Old rivalries resurfaced, and some species questioned whether the Council was truly capable of protecting them. Humanity once again found itself at the forefront of this new war, leading the charge to defend the galaxy from those who sought to tear it apart. The Resurgence was relentless, but humanity had learned from the past. They knew that strength alone was not enough to win this battle. It was not just about firepower, it was about strategy, unity, and determination. This time, humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the galaxy's future, and for the idea that no one should ever again be prey. In the end, the war would be decided not by the might of armies, but by the strength of their resolve. Humanity had once proven that they could stand up to the predators of the galaxy. Now, they would prove that they could overcome the darkest forces that sought to drag the galaxy back into the past. The final battle was not just about defeating the resurgence, it was about ensuring that the galaxy would never again fall into the hands of those who believed they could rule by fear. The outcome of this final war would shape the future of the galaxy. Would humanity and their allies emerge victorious once more, or would the darkness of the past swallow the light of the future? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: humanity would never be prey again. And they would fight, not just for their survival, but for the future of every species that called the galaxy home.